Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
To limit their statements to no more than 3 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously. Flashing lights on the colors of the microphones will prompt speakers to bring their remarks to a close after 3 minutes. I now give the floor to the representative of Jordan.
Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to thank Japan for organizing this important meeting on the rule of law among nations and welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, His Excellency Mr. Hayashi Yoshimasa. The rule of law among nations and international relations has been facing many challenges over the decades since the establishment of the United Nations. Despite the fact that the organization was established to bring and maintain peace, security, and development to the world, based on the respect of the rule of law, we have witnessed time and time again violations of the objects and purposes of the organization. The use of force or the threat thereof remains rampant, as well as serious violations of international law. Sovereign equality is becoming more of a slogan without any actual content. The right of peoples to self-determination is constantly being undermined, and the expansive interpretation of the right of self-defense has been an affront to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. Furthermore, states in general remain reluctant to voluntarily submit to their disputes to peaceful dispute settlement mechanisms, due in part to the lengthy and costly proceedings that ensue. Despite the development over the last few decades of the regime of international criminal law, international criminal justice remains hard to attain, and perpetrators of international crimes are escaping accountability. International criminal tribunals do not have the capacity to bring all perpetrators to justice, and states are generally unable or unwilling to exercise national criminal jurisdiction over such international crimes. The double standards is a core challenge in the application of the rule of law. This is becoming more obvious by the day. Some of those who call for the respect of the principles and purposes of the Charter somehow forget that such principles, including the right to self-determination when it comes to the Palestinian question. The inviolability of acquisition of territory by force is a cardinal principle of international law since the adoption of the Charter. Unfortunately, conquest, which has its roots in the era of colonialism, is the premise of Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories and its unlawful settlement policy. The international community must show a firm stand against such a grave breach of international law. Mr. President, COVID-19 has exacerbated and exposed the deficiencies in the application of the rule of law, especially as regards to development, human rights, and sovereign equality. The gap between developed and developing states and their peoples is growing larger as a result of COVID-19, thus undermining the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. It's against this background that Jordan calls on other members of the international community to engage in meaningful discussions on the rules-based international order with a view to identifying the challenges and providing solutions. And Jordan's understanding of the term is that it is synonymous with the term the rule of international law. Do we need new rules? How do we implement and enforce existing rules? Do we need structural changes, including to the UN system? And how will the UN become true to its objective of resolving conflict and not only managing them? Those are some of the questions that need to be answered, and it's our hope that the Summit for the Future will be able to contribute to debate on such questions and solutions. It's our common interest to promote the rule of law and its application. Without joint action on all levels, the world will continue to depart from the principles and objectives that bind us together. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Jordan for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me at the outset to congratulate you and His Excellency Mr. Hayashi Yoshimasa on presiding over the Security Council this month and on choosing this important topic that we are discussing today. We express our appreciation to the Secretary General for his intervention at the beginning of this session and the Professor Dabo Akande for his valuable briefing, as well as the briefing of the President of the ICJ. Mr. President, Egypt concurs with the concept note that the promotion of the rule of law and the maintenance of international peace and security are interlinked. In fact, promoting the rule of law among nations is the main guarantee for achieving the purposes and principles of the United Nations in general, especially the maintenance of international peace and security, which is the main objective behind the establishment of the United Nations. Allow me to make the following brief remarks on the topic under discussion in an attempt to explain Egypt's views on some questions asked in the concept note. 1. Talking about the role of the rule of law among nations requires, first and foremost, a definition of this quote-unquote law. Egypt believes that the UN principles stipulated in Article 2 of the Charter and the 1970 Declaration on Principles of International Law are the main reference for the rule of law at the international level. They enjoy unquestionable international consensus. We would like to recall that Egypt has been among the first countries to support the promotion of the rule of law at the international level by continuously supporting UN principles when voting on different UN resolutions. Egypt has also played a pioneer role in the special committee that developed the 1970 Declaration on Principles of International Law since its establishment in 1963 and up until the adoption of the Resolution 2625 by the General Assembly. 2. Unfortunately, there are a number of challenges impeding the achievement of the rule of law at the international level, mainly questioning its key pillars based on the principle of state sovereignty and other principles. I would like to shed light on the following two challenges. The first challenge: there are continuous attempts by some states to include concepts and measures that do not enjoy consensus and impose them on other countries. They consider that a collective commitment to such concepts and measures is an implementation of the rule of law at the international level. We would like to note, for example, the death penalty, which is discussed in the Secretary General's reports on the rule of law. We stress that what some societies consider a component of the rule of law may not be as important for other societies and may not be considered a component of the rule of law in other societies. Each society is unique and has been on its own cultural and social development journey. We stress that such recurrent attempts only jeopardize respect for the rule of law at the international level. The second challenge relates to the double standards applied when talking about the implementation of the rule of law at the international level. We all know full well, after following the pattern of voting on different UN resolutions, that votes change based on non-objective political considerations, even though the principles that all member states should be collectively implementing and committing to are the same. For example, many states have adopted inconsistent positions on issues such as the annexation of land by force, aggression, and the violation of the international humanitarian law, even though the principles are the same in all cases. Egypt stresses the dangers of adopting double standards when promoting the rule of law at the international level because they erode the credibility of the law and the multilateral system as a whole. 3. There remains, however, a glimpse of hope because we finally realized that there is a genuine problem facing our collective multilateral system and the credibility of the UN. This was revealed by consecutive international crises and addressed in the Secretary General's report, Our Common Agenda. We agree on the need to promote the role of different UN agencies working on the rule of law, especially the International Court of Justice, by making full use of its jurisdiction and legal opinions on all subjects to the largest extent. As for the Security Council, it is difficult to speak about a genuine promotion of its role in the strengthening of the rule of law without addressing the need to reform the Council and increase the number of its members to ensure equitable representation and end the historic injustice inflicted upon Africa, to ensure an equitable representation of our continent in line with the Azalwini Consensus and the Third Declaration. No real reform can take place at the Security Council unless the issue of the veto is addressed, because it allows the position of one permanent member to prevail over the position of the remaining members combined. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Egypt for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Singapore.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me at the outset congratulate Japan for assuming the presidency of the Security Council, and we commend Japan for its initiative in convening today's debate on the important topic of promoting and strengthening the rule of law. I also wish to thank the Secretary General, the President of the ICJ, as well as Professor Akande for their very important remarks this morning. Mr. President, the Security Council has debated the topic of the rule of law several times over the course of the last 2 decades. Nevertheless, this debate is relevant and timely because the context of peace and security today is vastly different. The events of the past year have shown us all that the rule of law cannot be taken for granted. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its annexation of sovereign Ukrainian territory have undermined international peace and security and violated the principles of the UN Charter and international law. The war in Ukraine poses a direct challenge to the multilateral system founded on the basis of the UN Charter and international law. In a context of war and conflict, multilateralism and international law may very well be the first casualties. However, the international response to the invasion and annexation of Ukraine clearly shows that the world has overwhelmingly rejected the path of invasion, annexation, and aggression. The adoption of resolutions in the General Assembly with an overwhelming majority condemning Russia's invasion and annexation is a clear demonstration that members of the UN want a multilateral system based on the UN Charter and international law. It is disappointing, but not surprising, that the Security Council has been unable to discharge its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. It is therefore important that every UN member state and every principal organ of the United Nations do their part for peace and security by upholding the rule of law. The rule of law cannot be replaced by the notion that might is right, and the UN must be always the custodian of the rule of law at the international level. In this regard, please allow me to make a few points. First, every member of the United Nations has a responsibility to comply with their obligations under the UN Charter and international law at all times. However, expressing support for the rule of law through statements are not good enough. Every state must be judged by its actions and by its adherence to and respect for international law obligations. We cannot allow UN members, especially the large and powerful countries, to pick and choose which international law obligations they seek to uphold. A la carte multilateralism is not multilateralism. A selective or unilateral approach to international law will only weaken the multilateral system and undermine international peace and security. Secondly, every member of the United Nations must support preventive diplomacy and the peaceful settlement of disputes. The Secretary General, too, has a crucial peacemaking role as reflected in Article 99 of the UN Charter, and he must be fully supported in this regard. The means of peaceful settlement of disputes that are laid down in Article 33 of the UN Charter should be fully utilized. Thirdly, the General Assembly, which is the main deliberative and the most representative organ of the United Nations, must continue to enhance its ability to contribute to the implementation of obligations under the UN Charter and international law. By doing so, the Assembly can contribute materially to the maintenance of international peace and security, particularly when the Security Council is unable to act. Finally, the rule of law applies at all levels. The rule of law at the international level cannot coexist without the rule of law at the national and regional levels. That is why Singapore has been a strong advocate of regional organizations contributing in accordance with Chapter 8 of the UN Charter. In Southeast Asia, ASEAN has played a crucial role in maintaining peace and security by providing a framework for regional dialogue and cooperation, and the ASEAN as a group will be making a statement later in the debate with which we entirely associate ourselves. The relative peace that the region enjoys in Southeast Asia is also due to a commitment to the rule of law as exemplified by the ASEAN Political Security Community Blueprint. The rule of law was and remains one of Singapore's foundational principles. As a small state, Singapore's ability to survive and thrive against the odds is in a large measure due to our insistence on applying the rule of law, both in our domestic and foreign affairs. And as a nation that stands for the rule of law, Singapore is ready to work with members of the Security Council and all other members of the United Nations to strengthen the multilateral system and to strengthen our collective commitment to the rule of law in order to build a more peaceful and secure world. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Singapore for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Romania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I commend the Japanese presidency for convening this debate on such a highly important topic, and also grateful for the Secretary General, the President of the ICJ, and Professor Akanda for setting the scene for this conversation. The respect for fundamental norms and principles of international law governing relations between states, many of which are reflected by the founding document of this organization, offers a solid prerequisite for stable peace among nations. The opposite, violations of these basic rules, trigger devastating consequences. And while ensuring respect for international law and its rule is a task shared by all UN members, the UN Charter has entrusted the states seated at this table a special responsibility in the maintenance of international peace and security. In a severe departure from its responsibilities, a permanent member of this Council, Russia, has been sustaining for almost a year now a brutal and unprovoked aggression against its neighboring country, Ukraine. The scale of violations of international law has called into question the resilience of the global rule of law and the credibility of the UN system as a whole. While much more is needed to address the impact of such blatant violation, it is encouraging to see the renewed focus of the international community for accountability and justice. A key component of the international response was the involvement of the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice within the respective mandates. And Romania has full trust in the independent and impartial ability of the ICC and the ICJ to bring justice. And this brings me to the second major component of a well-functioning global rule of law system, namely the crucial role of international judicial institutions in the peaceful settlement of disputes and in support of maintaining peace and security worldwide. Romania remains committed to supporting the ICJ as the principal judicial organ of the United Nations and its role in promoting and reinforcing the rules-based international order. With the aim to encourage a wider use of the court, in 2021, Romania put forward an initiative promoting the broader recognition of the ICJ jurisdiction, together with a group of supporting countries. The declaration lists the main arguments for accepting the court's contentious jurisdiction and encourages states to confer jurisdiction to the ICJ by by any of the means envisaged in the statute as deemed appropriate. The document reaffirms the important contribution of the ICJ to the peaceful settlement of disputes and the promotion of the rule of law globally, while inviting states to make better use of this potential. We do renew our invitation to all UN member states to endorse the declaration. Mr. President, several defense measures could prove invaluable to address current challenges and attacks to the rule of law. Consistent support to and cooperation with international courts and tribunals is needed. In relation to the International Court of Justice, the respect of its judgments and orders is paramount. States could build a predictable basis for accessing the court's jurisdiction by making declarations recognizing the jurisdiction of the court as compulsory and through the introduction of compromissory clauses in treaties. States should defer their disputes to the court and engage third cases if appropriate by making interventions before the court. And all states are invited to send a strong signal of general support to the court by endorsing our previously mentioned initiative. In relation to the ICC, we should continue to strive for the universality of the Rome Statute. Continued political and financial support for the court is also crucial, given its vital role in the fight against impunity and in providing assistance and reparations to victims of mass atrocities. The Security Council has a particular responsibility to ensure that the outstanding arrest warrants issued in the situation it deferred to the ICC are executed. Finally, Mr. President, Romania stands ready to continue to play its part in all of these efforts, living up to its own words as a responsible actor in the international arena and the strong supporter of the global rule of law. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Romania for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Italy aligns itself to the statement to be delivered by the European Union and to the statement to be delivered by Austria on behalf of the group of friends of the rule of law. Let me also commend Japan for assuming the presidency of the Security Council and convening today's open debate. We welcome this opportunity to focus on the rule of law in international relations as a key ingredient to ensuring peaceful and just relations among nations and people. 10 years have passed since our heads of state and government gathered at the UN headquarters to reaffirm their solemn commitment to the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, international law and justice, and to an international order based on the rule of law. Unfortunately, that solemn and unanimous pledge remains unfulfilled. In fact, as we gather today, those foundations are being shaken by the brutal war of aggression waged by Russia against Ukraine. Italy continues to stand firm in defense of the Charter of the United Nations, of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of nations, and of the self-determination of peoples. Mr. President, a multilateral system of peaceful relations among states based on the rule of law requires constant and long-term commitment in 5 different respects. Firstly, it requires strict adherence to international legal obligations, whether deriving from treaties or from customary international law. Compliance with international legal obligations is not a matter of choice, it is mandatory for all. That applies also to the obligations stemming from the Charter of the United Nations, including those of a procedural nature aimed at ensuring the proper functioning of the UN Security Council. Secondly, breaches of international law committed by states, especially when related to peremptory norms, must bear consequences. The UN Charter, in particular its Chapter 7, as well as the customary law on international responsibility codified by the International Law Commission, set out those legal consequences. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that they do not remain on paper. Thirdly, individuals responsible for gross violations of human rights and international humanitarian law must be held accountable. In this vein, Italy remains convinced that a universal, independent and impartial judicial institution such as the International Criminal Court, complementing the efforts of national authorities, is a key instrument to fighting impunity. Effective cooperation between the ICC and the Security Council is also essential if we want to end impunity. Fourthly, disputes that are likely to endanger international peace and security must be settled peacefully in accordance with Article 33 of the UN Charter. That includes resorting to international courts and tribunals and abiding by their judgment and decisions. In particular, the International Court of Justice plays a critical role in promoting the peaceful settlement of international disputes and contributes to the development and strengthening of international law as a fundamental condition for stability. Therefore, the cooperation between the ICJ and the Security Council must also be strengthened in accordance with the Charter. Fifthly, and finally, the codification and progressive development of international law must be pursued as a means to achieve legal certainty, good governance, and to adapt the law to the ever-changing realities of international relations. Italy continues to support the important work of the International Law Commission and of the Sixth Committee of the GA in this respect, including in important areas such as the law of state responsibility. Mr. President, 10 years have passed since we declared at the highest political level our commitment to the rule of law in international relations. It is now time to act. The international community can continue to count on Italy in this collective effort to reinforce the rule of law in international relations, including through a reform of the United Nations aimed at making the organization and this very body more democratic, representative, accountable, transparent, and effective. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Italy for their statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we thank Japan for convening this important debate and the briefers for their informative presentations. Indonesia aligns with itself with a statement to be made by the Philippines on behalf of ASEAN. Mr. President, the current state of our world is worrying. Crisis after crisis continues to unfold. Violations of international law has become a norm in the pursuit of narrow self-interest. The spirit of multilateralism, which is key for upholding international rule of law, continues to fade. We are indeed heading towards a slippery slope to a world where the law of the jungle reigns. Against this backdrop, allow me to make 3 points. First, the rule of law is critical in the maintenance of international peace and security. Adherence by all members to the UN Charter and international law is therefore fundamental. Any efforts to maintain international peace and security must also be founded on the genuine respect and preservation of rule of law amongst nations. The rule of great powers or the rule of force must never triumph over the rule of law. All countries, big or small, developed or developing, have equal responsibility to uphold the rule of law. As the 2012 declaration of the high-level meeting on rule of law states, rule of law applies to all states equally. Second, we must ensure a strong multilateralism that delivers. This is underpinned by strong respect for the rule of law. We must work for a multilateralism that promotes dialogue and cooperation, a multilateralism that leaves behind a take-it-or-leave-it approach, a multilateralism where the voice of all countries are heard and matters. In turn, a strong multilateralism will allow us to ensure the rule of law are respected and upheld, which will contribute to the maintenance of international peace and security. Third, we must promote pacific settlement of dispute. Indonesia condemns any threat or use of force to settle international dispute. As a guardian of international peace and security, the Security Council must play a key role to ensure that the rule of law is upheld. We also advocate all countries to settle their differences peacefully, including through the International Court of Justice. In this regard, the Security Council also needs to make use of all tools to foster stronger relations with the Court to assist the Council's work. Mr. President, to conclude, allow me to reaffirm Indonesia's commitment to ensure that the rule of law will always guide our response to global challenges. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Indonesia for their statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Austria.
Thank you, Mr. President, and let me commend Japan for assuming the presidency of the Security Council for January and convening today's debate. And let me also congratulate Ecuador, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, and Switzerland for starting the tenure as elected members of the Council. Austria has the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of 50 states of the group of Friends of the Rule of Law, and for brevity's sake, I refer to the list contained in the written statement. Since 2005, this cross-regional group devoted itself to standing up for international law and the rule of law. We welcome this opportunity to stress the relevance of the rule of law when it comes to fulfilling the purposes of the UN and upholding its charter. We thank you for the concept note and for the briefers for setting the scene this morning. In many ways, 2022 was a challenging year, especially for those who believe in the rule of law and who believe we should conduct our international relations in compliance with the treaties and customary international law. As we heard this morning, the UN Charter is at the core of how nations should coexist peacefully. Through our ratification, all member states agreed to be legally bound by the Charter. The key difference between a political commitment and the norm of international law is the binding, obligatory nature of the latter. If a state breaches an obligation in the international law, it must bear the legal consequences of state responsibility, as elaborated in detail by the ILC in its articles on state responsibility. Adherence to the rule of law is intended to ensure that the principles and norms we agreed on are respected and implemented all in good faith. This is in the interest of all states, large and small. By means of the UN Charter, the member states agreed on the principles of sovereign equality and to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Several General Assembly resolutions from last year reaffirmed the validity of these principles. For example, when they underlined the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and rejected attempts to acquire territories by force. When they called for an end to violations of international law in Myanmar, reaffirmed the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, and recalled the obligations of Afghanistan under international law. Clearly, UN member states continue to value these fundamental principles and the obligation to act in accordance with them. Adherence to international law serves our collective security and guarantees the safety of our citizens. Many conflicts could be avoided if states showed respect for the rule of law and complied with their obligations under the law, especially the UN Charter. This includes the obligation to settle international disputes by peaceful means, an obligation that was complied with in several instances in practice. For example, Italy and Austria with regard to the German-speaking minority 30 years ago, or more recently by Canada and Denmark together with Greenland regarding their maritime and land border dispute in the Arctic. If states do not resolve a conflict peacefully, the Security Council has the responsibility to maintain or restore international peace and security, including through restoring compliance with the law. In this context, the misuse of the veto and non-observance of Article 27.3 of the Charter is a grave concern. We welcome ideas to limit the use of the veto in certain cases, such as the French-Mexican initiative on suspension of the veto in cases of mass atrocities, or the ACT Code of Conduct, as well as Liechtenstein's veto initiative, which is now Chair Resolution 76262. At the same time, the UN must not give up if the Security Council cannot deliver. We saw this in the GA's Uniting for Peace resolution, last resorted to in February 22. Perhaps the time is right to consider further means of strengthening adherence to the Charter, reflecting better its legal binding nature. Perhaps we could explore possible ways to more effectively, consistently, and directly respond to grave violations of the Charter when the Security Council does not act. Mr. President, probably no other international institution embodies the principle of the rule of law among states better than the ICJ. We emphasize our appreciation of the Court's work and reiterate the need for all states to fulfill their obligation to respect and implement the Court's judgments and other binding measures. Similarly, we have the highest regard for other international courts and tribunals, such as the Permanent Court of Arbitration, the Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, and the International Criminal Court. The Security Council should continue to draw upon the expertise of these institutions, and when considering situations constituting a threat to international peace and security, the Council should consider whether they could be seized of the matter to enable a peaceful settlement of the dispute. Mr. President, the number of challenges the international community faces remains high. The rule of law must be part of the foundation on which we build our relationships and allow us to face these challenges together. Over the past years, many have complained about a lack of trust, a lack of confidence among UN member states. Compliance with international law is an excellent way to establish such trust. If we can rely on each other to adhere to the law, we have an excellent foundation for peaceful international relations. Let's not succumb to the temptations of power and force. Let us build on the power of law. Mr. President, that concludes the statement of the Group of Friends of the Rule of Law. I have 3 sentences more to state in my national capacity. Since joining the UN in 1955, Austria's contribution has always been guided by the principle and purposes of the Charter, international law, and the interests of the United Nations as a whole. Our high regard of the rule of law is reflected in our report entitled The UN Security Council and the Rule of Law, which guided us in our last membership in the Council. Austria is fully committed to adhere to these principles when it next serves on the Council. When we let our membership be guided by the rule of law and international law and strive to focus discussions on strengthening them, especially adherence to the United Nations Charter. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Austria for their statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of India.
Mr. President, at the outset, let me warmly congratulate Japan for its presidency of the Security Council this month, and to you also for taking this excellent initiative. I also thank the Secretary General, the President of the ICJ, and Professor Dapo Akande for their remarks earlier today. Mr. President, as we've all agreed today, rule of law is the foundational edifice of modern nation states. This foundation is underpinned by the UN Charter, where the principle of the sovereign equality of states is the basis for our collective actions. In the face of interconnected challenges that we face today, the UN represents our collective recognition that only cooperative and effective multilateralism can ensure peace and stability. While we firmly believe in the principles of multilateralism and peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with principles of international law, this can succeed only if the interaction between states is based on rules that aspire for greater collective welfare. In our view, a rules-based international order is one that is free from coercion and based on respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, transparency, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. In this regard, allow me to make 3 points which we believe are critical to ensure and strengthen the rule of law in the conduct of international relations. 1. Peaceful settlement of disputes is a key factor. Rule of law necessitates that countries respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, as they would expect their own sovereignty to be respected. Since the Pacta sunt servanda is a binding norm of the rule of law, it requires that countries must respect agreements signed with others, bilateral or multilateral, and do not take unilateral measures to undermine or nullify those very arrangements. 2. The application of the rule of law at the international level should protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states from aggression, including terrorism and including cross-border terrorism. States that use cross-border terror to serve narrow political purposes must be held accountable. This is only feasible when all countries stand together against common threats such as terrorism and do not engage in double standards for political expediency. 3. Strengthening the rule of law would also necessitate reforming international institutions of global governance, including those charged with the responsibility of the maintenance of international peace and security. Debates on strengthening the rule of law while holding on to anachronistic structures that lack representative legitimacy would serve little purpose in our endeavor to strengthen the rule of law. Mr. President, the purpose and relevance of multilateral organizations is increasingly being put to question. We have a collective responsibility and obligation to enhance the credibility and legitimacy of the international order. Let us strive to achieve this before it is too late. Thank you.
I thank the representative of India for their statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Estonia.
Mr. President, allow me to first congratulate the new elected members of the Council, Ecuador, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, and Switzerland. I would also like to congratulate Japan for taking up the position of the Security Council presidency. And I thank you for convening this high-level open debate on the rule of law. I thank also the distinguished briefers for their insightful interventions. Estonia aligns itself with a statement made by the representative of the European Union, and I would like to add a few thoughts to this. Dear colleagues, the rule of law is a core principle of governance that is fundamental to international peace and security and political stability. It is the backbone of protecting people's rights and fundamental freedoms and of achieving economic and social progress, development and prosperity. The rule of law ensures justice and fairness in which all citizens and the state itself are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated and equally enforced. In contrast to a habessing world, the rule of law accords predictability and legitimacy to the actions of states, forming a fundamental framework for the conduct of peaceful and mutually beneficial relations between us. While most progress on the rule of law is achieved during the times of peace, it is most in demand during the war times. Unfortunately, one is still pursuing the rule of force instead of the rule of law. Russia's barbaric war of aggression against the sovereign nation of Ukraine is the most blatant violation of the UN Charter since the Second World War. The unanimously adopted UN Charter, the 1970 Declaration of Principles of International Law, concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states, in accordance with the Charter of the UN and the General Assembly, resolutions affirming the importance of the rule of law are not only being trumped upon, they are flushed down the drain unless the global community reacts and holds those responsible accountable. Lack of accountability in the era of global connectivity is a legitimate concern for the international community as a whole. The crime of aggression is the mother of all crimes in international law, as it sets the scene for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of genocide. All these were unleashed by the Russian Federation in Ukraine. Mr. President, in this context, I would like to highlight the importance of establishing an international tribunal for the crime of aggression in Ukraine to guarantee that not only the perpetrators, but also the masterminds of the aggression will not escape the responsibility. Unfortunately, there is no judicial body that has jurisdiction over crime of aggression in Ukraine, because the ICC does not have jurisdiction in this case, and Russia would veto Security Council referral in any case. An international tribunal would fill this void and send a clear signal to all potential aggressors that starting a war will be very, very costly and will not be tolerated, that justice will be assured and international law and rule of law will always prevail. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Estonia for their statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Mr. President. The past year in particular has made it clear that the respect for the rule of law at the international level cannot be taken for granted. The brutal aggression by a permanent member of this Council against a founding member of the United Nations is an unprecedented attack against the UN Charter, the very foundation of the international rules-based order we are discussing today. And it is a stark reminder of the need to stand up for this order at all times. The United Nations Charter is clear on the prohibition of the illegal use of force and the peaceful settlement of conflicts. Aggression, as defined by the General Assembly by consensus in 1974 in the middle of the Cold War, is one of the most blatant assaults on a rules-based international order and must be met with a clear response. The Security Council, with its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security on behalf of the UN membership as a whole, has an obligation to act. In the case of Ukraine, the Security Council has delegated its responsibility to the General Assembly, as it was unable to make any meaningful decision due to the veto power. Enforcement of the key provisions of the UN Charter also entails accountability where they are violated in a blatant manner, including through individual criminal responsibility for the crime of aggression, which falls on individuals in leadership positions. As a referral to the International Criminal Court by the Council, which would be the ideal course of action, seems very unlikely at best, we have the obligation to think about alternative paths to ensure accountability for the aggression against Ukraine. Mr. President, when the Council is blocked by the veto, the General Assembly must step in, as it has done successfully on various occasions in the past year. The GA is the only universal organ of this organization and the main guardian of the rule of law. Efforts to strengthen the Assembly's role thus remain crucial. General Assembly Resolution 76/262, also known as the Veto Initiative, adopted last year by consensus, is an essential step towards that end. It has increased the accountability and transparency of the work of this organization, including by its impact on the use of the veto itself. Going forward, we also see an urgent need to discuss the manner in which Article 27.3 of the UN Charter, stipulating that a party to a dispute shall abstain from voting, is and should be applied. Mr. President, Liechtenstein continues to support the work of the International Court of Justice to safeguarding the rule of law at the international level, including its advisory role on legal questions. This is also exemplified by Liechtenstein's most recent declaration of intervention under Article 63 in the case of allegations of genocide under the Genocide Convention Ukraine versus Russia. This Council, too, has the competence to ask the ICJ for advisory opinions on any legal question. Justice and peace necessarily go hand in hand, and they must be at the center of our common efforts, also in the context of the new agenda for peace, and especially this year. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Liechtenstein for their statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation appreciates Japan to convene this open debate on this important and timely topic. International peace and security can only be maintained when relations among nations are based on commonly agreed rules. After World War II, there was a common understanding on the need to have basic rules, which include the principles of respecting sovereign equality and refraining from threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. This became the basis of the UN Charter and the UN system, the fundamental framework of international relations for more than 75 years. Unfortunately, in recent years, threats to basic international norms have been increasing. To address such challenges and promote the rule of law, I would like to mention the following. First, taking insufficient or no action in response to plain breaches of the rule of law will allow violators and perpetrators to continue to threaten international peace and security and make rule by force more tempting. Therefore, in cases when the fundamental norms of the international system are violated, the Security Council must act. If the Council fails to fulfill its primary responsibility due to the exercising of veto powers, the General Assembly should be able to swiftly act with its recommendatory power under the Uniting for Peace resolution. Second, we would like to bring attention to the solemn obligation conferred to all of us according to Article 25 of the UN Charter. That is, to fully implement the Security Council resolutions. In this light, it is simply appalling to witness that the DPRK, a UN member state, completely disregards and even derides its obligation under the UN Charter and continues unlawful provocations. The DPRK has launched countless ballistic missiles last year in clear violation of multiple Security Council resolutions. Last week, Pyongyang even reaffirmed its reckless and extremely dangerous nuclear ambition by openly declaring at the meeting of its party Central Committee that it will, I quote, exponentially increase its nuclear arsenal and develop another ICBM system, unquote. It is deplorable that this Council failed to respond properly to the DPRK's plain, flagrant, and repeated violations of multiple Security Council resolutions, despite about 10 rounds of Security Council formal and informal meetings on this throughout last year. The Republic of Korea would also like to bring the Council's attention the ongoing evasions of Security Council sanctions by the DPRK and other UN member states. Such routine and daily breaches of the sanctions regime must be stopped by the Council. Third, the Council should closely monitor egregious human rights abuses and atrocious crimes across the world, the impunity for which is in clear contravention of the rule of law. In this regard, my delegation would like to recall that this Council is seized of the situation in the DPRK, including its human rights situation, as an agenda item separate from non-proliferation issues of the DPRK. The Council must seriously consider ways to effectively deal with the abysmal human rights situation in the DPRK. Last but not least, in light of the rules-based international order, the international community should be vigilant about challenges to peace and security in new spheres, including cyberspace, outer space, and new technology. The rule of law must be at the heart of any discussions on these emerging topics. The Council can and should play a role by deliberating in unfolding and potential threats to international peace and security in these fields, such as cyber attacks. Mr. President, over the past 7 decades, the Republic of Korea has pursued economic and political development within the current international order, based on the rule of law, including the UN Charter. This is why the President of the Republic of Korea emphasizes universal values, including freedom, human rights, and the rule of law, and last September reiterated the importance of global solidarity based on such values. Our recently announced strategy for a free, peaceful, and prosperous Indo-Pacific also demonstrates our commitment to the rule of law and peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with international law. The Republic of Korea clearly opposes upsetting the international order and is unequivocally committed to upholding the UN Charter and the rule of law. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement. And now I give the floor to the representative of Armenia.
Mr. President, I would like to congratulate Japan on assuming the membership in the Security Council and the presidency for the month of January. We express our appreciation for the presence of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan and thank also the UN Secretary General, the President of International Court of Justice, and Professor Akande from Oxford University for their important contribution to today's debate. As we reflect on the challenges for the promotion of the rule of law in the maintenance of international peace and security, we are reminded that upholding the rule of law is essential for the realization of the rights to truth, justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-recurrence. We are equally reminded that more often than not, it is the lack of accountability that breeds more violations. As the principal judicial body of the United Nations, the International Court of Justice has a central role in promoting justice and accountability and upholding faith in the rule of law among nations. Strengthening adherence to the norms and principles of international law requires concerted efforts to ensure that grave violations do not go unpunished. Armenia is committed to efforts to effectively address and combat impunity, having recently launched the process of ratifying the Rome Statute of International Criminal Court. Likewise, Armenia supports elaboration and adoption of the universally accepted Treaty on Preventing and Punishing Crimes Against Humanity, and we welcome the recent progress achieved in regard in the Legal Committee of the General Assembly. Mr. President, time and again Armenia has alerted the international community on the instances of gross violations of international law in our part of the world. We have repeatedly brought it to the attention of the Council that Azerbaijan has been engaged in the illegal practice of acquisition of territories by force, having duly reported such acts of aggression under Article 51 of the UN Charter. We have consistently alerted the members of the Council that, emboldened by the results of the use of force in the past, Azerbaijan now seeks to normalize violence and aggression, to impose unilateral solutions, and to conduct the policy of ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh. The latest such example is the ongoing blockade of the Lachin Corridor, the only supply route in and out of Nagorno-Karabakh, in grave violation of the existing obligations under the Trilateral Statement of 9 November 2020 and the international humanitarian law. Among numerous violations of the norms of international law, the blockade of Lachin Corridor also challenges the ICJ order, namely the provisional measure to refrain from any action which might aggravate or extend the dispute before the court or make it more difficult to resolve, unquote. Mr. President, on 20 December, the Security Council held an emergency meeting to address the humanitarian situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. We appreciate the publicly expressed calls by the Council members to restore the free and secure movement along the Lachin Corridor and to respect the previously reached agreements and resolve the differences through peaceful means. Obviously, the inability to adopt a unanimously agreed outcome following the emergency meeting of the Council has prompted the serial violator of all norms of humanity and international law to brand it, and I quote from their official sources, a diplomatic success of Azerbaijan and a New Year gift from the President of Azerbaijan to his people, unquote. Isn't it an affront to the collective conscience of this body responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security? For more than 30 days now, the safe and unimpeded passage of people and goods continues to be denied. Children remain separated from their families. Electricity and internet are cut off, while food stamps are introduced to address the immediate needs of the besieged population of 120,000 people. Whatever the deceptions or misconceptions the leadership of Azerbaijan and their enablers may diligently fabricate, the fact of the matter is that there is only one side that is characterized by pervasive hate speech, with public figures and government officials frequently inciting ethnic hatred against Armenians, as reflected in the latest conclusions of the UN Committee on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Only one side has been on record of rewarding a hate criminal and opening an ethnic hatred park with racist mannequins on display. Only one side fails to return prisoners of war in flagrant violation of Geneva Conventions and keeps harassing and kidnapping civilians. Only one side keeps violating ceasefire and invading the territory of the other, and there is only one side whose military commits, cheers, and celebrates horrendous war crimes.
as ever-mounting disturbing instances of atrocities, including against women, continue to surface in social networks. Mr. President, Armenia believes in the United Nations, in the purposes and principles enshrined in its charter. We believe in the basic principles of resolution of conflict derived from the international law. We believe in the integrity and independence of the International Court of Justice and of the International Criminal Court. And we want to believe that this Security Council will live up to its mandate and responsibilities, and that it will rise above the ideological differences and conceptual disagreements for the benefit of justice, the rule of law and human rights, and for the sake of freedom, peace, and security. In order to prevent an imminent humanitarian catastrophe from happening, the United Nations should act in a decisive and timely manner to deny the brutal dictatorship of its plans to suffocate and ethnically cleanse the Armenian people of Nagorno-Karabakh, whose only ambition is to live in dignity in their homeland, free from coercion or any form of foreign domination. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Armenia for their statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Lebanon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, allow me to congratulate Japan on assuming the presidency of the Security Council. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate the new members of the Council and commend the outgoing members. Mr. President, this debate is an opportunity to reaffirm that the force of the law should prevail over the law of force, everywhere and always, and it's also an opportunity to underscore that the international rules-based order aims to ensure sovereign equality among nations. The Charter of the United Nations is the cornerstone of that, and this is the very reason that we are all in this building and in this room. Mr. President, the consolidation of international law and justice are principles that form the foundation of the rule of law and without which we cannot build lasting peace and security. Promoting the rule of law, therefore, cannot depend on the circumstances. It cannot be invoked or defended when everything is going well and then suddenly set aside when things go wrong. Through the patchy implementation of certain principles or through selective indignation, the credibility of our multilateralism is undermined. Strengthening the rule of law therefore involves respect for and a coherent, consistent implementation of international norms, and this Council must ensure the complete implementation of all the resolutions it has adopted. Mr. President, justice goes hand in hand with peace. In this regard, the International Court of Justice is an essential component of the rule of law because it promotes the peaceful settlement of disputes rooted in our United Nations Charter. Therefore, one must comply with the decisions handed down by the International Court of Justice. Going before the court never represents a hindrance or a barrier to peace, rather it serves the cause of peace, and this Security Council must stand up in the face of iniquitous measures taken because a majority of states have decided to go before the judges, the law and the court by submitting a request for an advisory opinion. Mr. President, we cannot aspire to lasting peace and security if human rights continue to be trampled. They are a pillar of the rule of law. While this year marks the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we should firmly reiterate its fundamental nature and affirm that human rights must guide decision-making processes in the United Nations. This involves ensuring the full and entire participation of women and to strengthen the participation of young people and civil society. Their contributions to conflict prevention and resolution are no longer in any doubt. This is the heart of the social contract that the Secretary-General aspires to in our common agenda and which Lebanon supports his efforts. Justice has pride of place there because the Secretary-General is proposing a new vision of the rule of law. Lastly, Lebanon supports the United Nations' efforts to strengthen the rule of law at the national and international levels. Mr. President, my country knows how much it owes to the United Nations, which has stood alongside us for so many decades, helping us get through crises. Lebanon has always had the conviction that the rule of law has the aim of protecting all states, both big and small. And it's also for that reason that Lebanon played a decisive role in the drafting of the United Nations Charter or the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We will continue to defend this multilateral order. It is undoubtedly imperfect and undoubtedly needs reform, but we still need it to address the growing number of existing and emerging challenges. Thank you.
Representative of Lebanon for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
President. congratulate you on convening today's open debate on the promotion and strengthening of the rule of law and the maintenance of international peace and security, the rule of law among nations. Greece aligned itself with the statement of the European Union to be delivered later and wishes to add the following its national capacity. Greece firmly believes that the ideal of international order that is based on international law can be pursued only through unwavering adherence to the United Nations Charter. Article 2, Para 4 to the UN Charter clearly states that all member states shall refrain from the threat of all use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Moreover, the Declaration on Principles of International Law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states, as well as the Secretary-General report, A Common Agenda, reaffirmed the significance of the rule of law in the maintenance of international peace and security. Unfortunately, 77 years after the unanimous adoption of the UN Charter, we witness an unprecedented disregard of the founding principles of the international system. We witness a number of crises, recently the aggression against Ukraine. We believe it is of utmost importance to collectively uphold the principles enshrined in the UN Charter. In this respect, the judicial settlement of all disputes through the principal judicial body of the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, is evidencing the cardinal importance of the rule of law as regards dispute resolution and maintenance of international peace and security. Equally important is the respect of the decision of the Court, including its orders indicating provisional measures. Lastly, accountability for international heinous crimes remains also a challenge as regards the rule of law at the international level. The only way forward concerning dispute settlement is through abiding by the rule of law instead of the rule of force. To this end, we also need to ensure that decision-making at the UN level becomes more efficient and transparent. If elected as a non-permanent member of the Security Council for the period 2025-2026, Greece will contribute to the promotion of full respect of the rules and principles enshrined in the UN Charter and the values underpinning them. As a country which places respect for international law at the center of its policy, Greece is determined to spare more effort to promote a charter-compliant approach to all matters relating to international peace and security. We all stand ready to cooperate with all members of the United Nations to uphold the collective security system established by the Charter. Last but not least, we are deeply aware that peace and security should prevail not only through the rule of law, but also through sustainable development, in particular through the achievement of Sustainable Development Goal 16, meaning the achievement of peaceful and inclusive societies by providing access to justice for all, by building effective, accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. Hence, Greece concentrates its development efforts and allocates its aid, including assistance through capacity building, by means of transfer of know-how and expertise, with the aim of providing developing countries with best practices and model laws, enhancing and consolidating human rights, institutional and legislation at the domestic level at a more general plane by contributing among others to the reduction of poverty and inequality in the world, the consolidation of peace and stability, the effective management of migration flows, and the respect for cultural heritage. In this context, Greece places particular emphasis on the implementation of the 2030 Agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals, as they provide an ambitious, visionary and transformative framework for a new, equitable and sustainable development path. I would like to thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of Greece for their statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and of course my own country, Denmark. Mr. President, rule of law is a vital prerequisite for justice, peace, and prosperity, and adherence to it has significant positive impacts on the global community. It is a global public good, and it is a powerful safeguard against the primitive doctrine that might is right. But the rule of law is under pressure. In the Secretary-General's latest yearly report on strengthening and coordinating the United Nations rule of law activities, it is abundantly clear that the rule of law must be protected on every front. Mr. President, international law, including the UN Charter and its prohibition on the acquisition of territory by the use of force, applies to all states and must be respected by all states without exception. And when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine last year, it constituted a blatant violation of international law. And whilst horrified by Russia's action,
we are encouraged to see how a vast majority of countries across regions and continents have stood by the UN Charter and the rule of law and rejected this violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and the UN Charter in both words and deeds. The adoption of a series of General Assembly resolutions with an overwhelming majority, including as late as in October 2022, calling Russia's attempt to annex part of Ukraine out for what it is, an illegal and in contravention of the UN Charter. These resolutions are testimony to our strong and collective response to Russia's attack on Ukraine and the international rules-based order. Mr. President, to safeguard the rule of law, it is not enough to condemn the Russian aggression. Both the Russian Federation and those individuals responsible for committing international crimes must be held accountable for their brutal behavior. The Security Council is entrusted with the primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security, and Russia's use of the veto and prevention of the Council in fulfilling its mandate is unacceptable. And we fully support and urge other UN members to join initiatives to limit the use of the veto, including the ACT Code of Conduct and the French-Mexican initiative on the suspension of veto powers in cases of mass atrocity. We also welcome the adoption of the UN General Assembly Resolution 76/262 on the veto initiative, which was a step in the right direction to create more transparency and accountability for the use of the veto. And we are further encouraged by the multiple accountability efforts, including the ongoing investigations into the situation in Ukraine by the International Criminal Court, the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, and the current case at the International Court of Justice. Holding Russia accountable is paramount also to prevent future breaches of international law. Mr. President, the rule of law and accountability, including access to justice and accountability for sexual and gender-based violence, as mentioned by the Secretary General in his latest report on strengthening and coordinating United Nations rule of law activities, can of course not be achieved without substantial work on the part of international courts and institutions of the global community. But this work relies on our support, both politically and financially. And during the recent UN annual budget negotiations, the Nordic countries underscored the need to uphold the rule of law and the protection of human rights through UN institutions. They are, without a doubt, prerequisite for the rules-based international order that we are all committed to, and we need to put our money where our mouths are. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to congratulate Ecuador, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, and Switzerland on their election as non-permanent members of the Security Council. We also congratulate Japan and yourself, Ambassador, on assuming the presidency for this month and organizing today's debate. We thank the Secretary General, the President of the ICJ, and Professor Akande for their briefings. Mr. President, great civilizations have always been built on the foundations of order created through laws. At the international level, the adoption of laws and rules of conduct have been adopted to regulate the use of force, especially military force, in interstate relations. Yet it was the UN Charter which for the first time placed explicit constraints on the use or threat of use of force, except for self-defense or when collectively authorized by the Security Council. The UN Charter also set out fundamental principles: self-determination of peoples, sovereign equality and territorial integrity of states, and non-interference in their internal affairs. These Charter principles are the source and foundation for the world order that has enabled us for over 7 decades to contain and resolve conflicts and prevent another world war. The Charter's principles have been further elaborated in various international agreements and declarations
and are the most important source of international law in contemporary times. The Security Council has a special responsibility to implement the Charter's purposes and principles. The Council's resolutions and decisions, whether adopted under Chapter 6 or Chapter 7 of the Charter, are legally binding, since member states are obliged under Article 25 of the Charter to implement the decisions of the Security Council. Mr. President, the UN Security Council has been unable to ensure consistent and universal implementation and respect for the central principles of the UN Charter. It has, to its credit, never endorsed or authorized the unilateral use of force. Yet, it was often unable to actively prevent the use of force. For example, in the Middle East in 1956, 1967, and 2003. The Security Council should act preemptively to prevent conflicts before they erupt. To this end, the Council should be enabled to meet automatically without a procedural decision on any item of the agenda. The Council has also not been able to secure consistent implementation of its own resolutions, such as the resolutions relating to Palestine or Jammu and Kashmir. In these cases, the right to self-determination, a fundamental principle of the Charter, has been suppressed brutally, and foreign occupation has been allowed to persist over several decades. It is essential to elaborate the modalities through which this principle of self-determination can be implemented universally and consistently in the contemporary context. The Security Council needs to actively promote the resolution of conflicts and disputes, not simply manage them, much less ignore them. It should fully utilize the several instrumentalities available under the Charter for the Pacific settlement of disputes. The Secretary General should be less reticent in exercising his authority under Article 99 of the Charter. No party to a conflict or dispute should be able to refuse the Secretary General's good offices, nor reject mediation and arbitration. And the remit of judicial mechanisms, especially the International Court of Justice, should be fully utilized, for example, by making the court's jurisdiction mandatory on issues that are on the agenda of the Security Council. Mr. President, today, world peace and the international security architecture are under grave threat. We need to address how to promote universal and consistent respect for the fundamental principles of the UN Charter and international law. We need to find ways to empower and fully utilize the United Nations and its organs to build a durable structure of international peace and security. I thank you, sir.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for their statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Olaf Skog, Head of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and congratulations to Japan for acceding to the Security Council and its presidency and for organizing today's very important debate. Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states and the candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Georgia and San Marino all align themselves with this statement. Mr. President, the rule of law is a key component of the maintenance of international peace and security. A rules-based international order, when norms of international law are adhered to and those breaching these norms are held accountable, is indeed essential for lasting peace and security. The rule of law protects people from the unchecked rule of the powerful, and I would say that a vast majority of the members of the United Nations would see the rule of international law as the first line of defense when it comes to their security, their independence, and their sovereignty. The UN Charter and its core principles are very much at the heart of this system. The EU and its member states therefore reaffirm our respect for the rule of law, at international and national level. We support the call for a new vision for the rule of law by the Secretary General as expressed in our common agenda. The rule of law must be upheld at all times, in times of peace and during times of crisis. It is indeed a main tool in prevention of conflict, as the Secretary General stated this morning. No crisis can justify departure from the rule of law. As the COVID pandemic and now Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine have proved, it is during times of crisis that we need more multilateralism, more recourse to the UN, and more adherence to the rule of law. It is our belief that the full respect of the rule of law at the national level reinforces the resilience of international rules during times of crisis. To address the questions put forward to steer this debate, let me make 3 points. First, as the Secretary General said a month ago to this august body, even during the darkest periods of the Cold War, collective decision-making and continuous dialogue in the Security Council maintained a functioning, if imperfect, system of collective security that prevented a military conflict between the major powers. Yet, it has not prevented Russia's cruel and senseless war of aggression against Ukraine. That aggression is a blatant violation of international law, of the rule of law at international level, with severe consequences far beyond the borders of Ukraine. The permanent members of the Security Council have been vested with special privileges that should mirror also special responsibilities. Foremost among them, to serve as models in implementing the Charter. How deep the disappointment resounds around the world when that right is so flagrantly and doubly violated, first by breaking the rules, and then by misusing the veto to protect itself and deter meaningful action by this body, as is the case currently by Russia. The use of the veto in cases of atrocity crimes, including for referrals to the International Criminal Court, remains a matter of serious concern for us. It prevents the Security Council from discharging its important function entrusted upon it by the UN Charter. We need a stronger system of collective security, but we also need a stronger system of collective accountability. We therefore call on the permanent members of the Security Council to refrain from using the right of the veto in cases of mass atrocities and to use its right of referral, including in relation to the crime of aggression. When fundamental tenets of the UN Charter, such as the principle that UN members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force, are blatantly breached, there must be accountability. International law cannot be a spider web that catches the small but misses the powerful. Those who commit wrongdoings, no matter the height or size, must be held to account. The ICC is central to accountability efforts. Second, peace and friendship among nations can only be based on respect for international law. As the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, the International Court of Justice plays a key role in this respect. The court plays an important role in the settlement of international disputes by peaceful means. Through its judgments, advisory opinions, and orders, the Court contributes significantly to a rules-based international order and to the maintenance of international peace. On 16th of March last year, the Court ordered Russia to immediately suspend its military operations in Ukraine. The Court decision, unfortunately, remains unimplemented in flagrant defiance, again, of the rule of law. Third, Mr. President, on disinformation. This has increasingly become a challenge to the rule of law, human rights, and the safeguarding of international peace and security across borders. Disinformation may destabilize the rule of law and may cause broader societal harm. We are concerned by this worrying trend. Most significantly, disinformation has the potential to undermine the credibility of institutions that play an essential role in upholding the rule of law and in the maintenance of international peace and security. To conclude, Mr. President, we need to redouble our commitment to the rule of law as a means to redouble our commitment to a more peaceful and prosperous world. We look to members on this Security Council to all shoulder their responsibilities, and we look forward to working with everyone to elaborate a new vision of rule of law as suggested by the Secretary General. I thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Skul for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Philippines.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. We thank Japan for convening this timely debate, and we welcome His Excellency Mr. Hayashi Yoshimasa, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan, an important dialogue partner of ASEAN. We believe that under his leadership, Japan will have a very successful month as President of the Security Council. We thank the briefers, including Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, and the President of the General Assembly, Judge John Donoghue, the President of the International Court of Justice, and Professor Dapo Akande for their statements on this issue. Our world today is facing increasingly complex and cross-cutting challenges, including challenges to the rule of law among nations on almost all fronts. The need to uphold the rule of law has never been as urgent as now. ASEAN member states are committed to upholding the principles stipulated in the Charter of the United Nations and on the basis of international law, which is the indispensable foundation of a more peaceful, prosperous, and just world. We affirm our commitment to the Declaration on Principles of International Law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. ASEAN has embraced and continues to promote the rule of law in all its aspects and affirms its commitment to live in a region of lasting peace, security, and stability, sustained economic growth, shared prosperity and social progress, good governance, and to the promotion and protection of human rights in conformity with the fundamental principles and purposes of the ASEAN Charter. ASEAN member states thus believe that diplomacy and negotiation Mr. President, ASEAN affirms the importance of multilateralism and the significance of ASEAN's partnership with other external partners, including regional and international organizations such as the United Nations, to address global concerns, pursue shared goals, and promote sustainable development and inclusive growth. As a rules-based international intergovernmental organization, ASEAN has long been committed to stability and security in the region. We continue to emphasize the need for a committed multilateral approach in responding to emerging opportunities and challenges, and to actively shape a rules-based regional architecture that is capable of dealing with pressing common regional and global issues. This was further reaffirmed on the occasion of the 38th ASEAN Summit in Brunei Darussalam in October 2021, where ASEAN leaders issued the Declaration of Upholding Multilateralism. Important treaties, declarations, and instruments have paved the way for our success, including ASEAN's founding document, the ASEAN Declaration of 1967, the ASEAN Charter, which entered into force since 2008, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia of 1976, the Treaty on Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone of 1995, the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration of 2012, and as well as the Declaration of Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea of 2002. We remain committed to working towards the early conclusion of an effective and substantive code of conduct in the South China Sea, consistent with international law, including the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, within a mutually agreed timeline. The importance of these treaties and instruments was reiterated in the recently concluded 40th and 41st ASEAN Summits held in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. ASEAN member states share a commitment to maintaining and promoting peace, security, and stability in our region, including in maritime areas such as the South China Sea, as well as the peaceful resolution of disputes in accordance with international law. We observe and promote in good faith the Manila Declaration on the peaceful settlement of international disputes. ASEAN member states thus believe that diplomacy, negotiation, and peaceful means are critical to the maintenance and promotion of international peace, security, stability, and hope that the United Nations will continue to afford primary importance to these important treaties and instruments in the conduct of mutually beneficial relations among nations. Mr. President, we reiterate ASEAN's commitment to the rule of law. We commemorate the 10th anniversary of the declaration of the high-level meeting of the General Assembly on the rule of law at the national and international levels in 2022. The ASEAN Political Security Community Blueprint 2025 seeks to promote a rules-based, people-oriented, and people-centered community and the rule of law at the national and international levels. ASEAN strives to achieve this by implementing instruments such as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, notably Goal 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions. Country-driven capacity building for member states, including through the delivery of technical assistance and using digital technologies, remains critical for the promotion of the rule of law as well as for the purpose of ensuring effective, inclusive, and accountable justice institutions. ASEAN reaffirms its commitment to good governance, accessible institutions, transparency and accountability, and anti-corruption. This approach will further respect for the rule of law at the national and international levels, which will contribute to greater socio-economic development, peace, justice, and prosperity for all. Finally, the ASEAN way of consensus building, sustained constructive engagement, respect for the views of all parties concerned, and fundamental principles of international law, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, non-interference in international affairs, in internal affairs, and peaceful settlement of disputes, has worked for ASEAN for over 5 decades, and we therefore believe that it is the most effective way to address common challenges of humanity that achieve sustainable results. Mr. President, I shall now deliver the following statement in my national capacity. As founding member of the United Nations, the Philippines reaffirms its commitment to the Charter and adherence to the rule of law among nations. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in his first address to the General Assembly said, and I quote, "Amidst challenging global tides, an important ballast stabilizes our common vessel that is open, inclusive, and rules-based international order that is governed by international law and informed by the principles of equity and of justice," close quotes. The Philippines has exerted utmost efforts to reinforce the predictability and stability of international law, a great equalizer among states in addressing challenges to peace and security. With the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, we provide another example of how states should resolve their differences through reason and through right. The South China Sea arbitration, along with the convention, are twin anchors of our positions and actions on the South China Sea. This is in line with the landmark 1970 Declaration on Principles of International Law concerning friendly relations among states. We reiterate the call for the progressive development and codification of these principles to secure their more effective application and their contribution to realizing the purposes of the United Nations. We have done this with respect to the principle that states have settled their international disputes by peaceful means. With the 1982 Manila Declaration, the peaceful settlement of international disputes through the Special Committee on the UN Charter. The International Law Commission, along with the Special Committee, could be tasked by states to undertake similar work on principles under challenge. The unprecedented crisis of recent past have indeed presented us with a breakdown or breakthrough scenario. The Secretary General has invited us to have a new vision on the rule of law. The rule of law, while under challenge, is an indispensable element of our diplomatic toolkit. Rule of law applies to all states equally. To reimagine it, we need to do a stock take of what we have achieved, and there are many, and move forward. The 2012 declaration of the high-level meeting of the General Assembly on the rule of law at the national and international levels is a milestone in this regard. Its essence is a people-centered rule of law at the national and international levels, to which we subscribe. At the center of the Philippines' efforts to promote an international rules-based regime are our fisherfolk, seafarers, and migrant workers. At the national level, it is an indispensable part of our Philippine Development Plan, which recognizes that an efficient justice system and rule of law are necessary for fostering a high-trust society, consistent with the renewal of the social contract as envisioned in our common agenda. In closing, we renew our thanks to the government of Japan and especially His Excellency Mr. Hayashi Yoshimasa for highlighting the rule of law in this declaration. The Summit of the Future in 2024 is an opportunity to reaffirm this global consensus on the rule of law as a precondition to the future we want. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Philippines for their statement. As we still have 40 more speakers on the list, I wish to remind that each speaker to limit their statement as shorter as possible. Now I give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President, and we thank Japanese Presidency of the Council for organizing this important debate. Mr. President, the UN Charter has served as the constitution for the functioning of the international system over 7 decades, authoritatively guiding the international community in preserving and ensuring peace, security, freedom, justice, and development. Strong and effective multilateralism based on the purposes and principles of the Charter is a prerequisite for security, stability, peace, and prosperity. So is the rule of law. It is these fundamental notions that preempt arbitrariness and distraction, promote justice and accountability, foster dialogue and trust among nations, and facilitate the proper management of security challenges. Indeed, the rule of law is foundational to the United Nations, and the Security Council has a special role to play in ensuring that it is respected. Unfortunately, this key principle is disregarded much too often, and the current dynamics in the Council do not allow this body to duly assert itself in upholding the rule of law among nations.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.